Hello, my name is Mark Dinverno, and together with my long-term colleague Matthew Yee-King, both of us from Goldsmiths, University of London, we're going to talk about the ideas of presence and performance, two carefully chosen words there, as part of a series that's hosted again by University of London and Goldsmiths on our experiences of teaching online. And this particular session was called Adventures in Online Synchronous Learning. And just to be clear, we are re-recording this talk for two reasons. One, we want to give a high quality resolution download available for anyone who's interested. And second, there were things that we learned from giving the talk and getting the feedback from the delegates there. And we're including some of those ideas as well in this. But it's essentially the same talk. Matthew and I have been heavily involved in setting up the BSc in Computer Science. It's a partnership between the University of London, between Goldsmiths and between Coursera, which is kind of the major online learning platform in the world. And it's fair to say that we have learned a huge amount in doing this. And, you know, we didn't go looking for feedback from students, but the students really kind of something worked. I mean, we worked really hard on this. We tried, some things didn't work, some things did work, but we got very, very fantastic feedback from some of the students, and maybe there's things here that that are interesting, and so we kind of wanted to share what we're doing in the spirit again of seeing what other people are out there doing, and maybe we can develop a stronger sense about how to make these lectures less about lots of material and more about kind of experience of learning together, and that's really key. So I wouldn't typically do this, so here is a slide, and I want to say why bullet points are difficult. I think part of what makes something really exciting and engaging is it's improvised. You see the kind of creative processes of me as they unfold as I'm teaching about the subject. We'll come to that in a minute. I think bullet points, it's too preordained. It's very hard to connect with them in an exciting and curious and way that you can do with the unfolding moment to moment of a creative practice, like doing maths, like playing the piano, and like programming. And we'll come to programming a bit later. So I wouldn't use slides, and if I had some things to say to students, I would absolutely just use a camera like this without any text and say, one of the things that I'm really keen to talk about is we're kind of scared about being stuck. And actually, I think being stuck is the most wonderful thing, because it's only then, as you kind of, the ecstasy of kind of, not being able to do something, and you're really trying with all of your mind and your heart to work something out. It's only then, really, that the big learning takes place. And the joy of going from stuck to working things out, if we got everything first time round, where would be the fun in learning? So, there are some important points I want to say. I will come up front and say them. So the first thing I want to talk about is presence, and in presence is my physical environment. I can make my digital presence much stronger if I care about the digital environment. So some obvious mistakes here. I would not normally talk by an open window. So I'm going to close that, and immediately I hope that you see that my I come a bit more alive. But I do a bit more than that. This is up to you. This is a very cheap black screen which I put behind me. So I will do that. It's not completely perfect, but I could adjust that in real time so that you don't notice these little corners. I can do that. So that's one thing that I can do. Another thing I can do is some cheap lights here that I've got. I can give myself a bit of light, and giving all of my secrets away. What I have tended to do, and again, it's about, we talk about presence and performance. It's trying to give myself as much presence as possible, so I can create a performance so that the students are engaged. We're reading so much about students turning off online. I mean, this is really hard to try and do this. Anyway, I'm giving away all my secrets. I hope you don't mind me doing this. But now, so I've got black backcloth. This is how I tend to do it. I've got some lights here, which I can move around, and I can use my hands and my face to really communicate things. So having done my physical presence, the next thing I think I want to talk to you about is sound. At the moment, I am using, I have to say, it's a very nice microphone, but you can get USB microphones reasonably cheap, and it is worth investigating sound. I'm going to just show you the difference. I'm using this mic at the moment, but listen what happens if I go back to the microphone on my laptop machine, on my desktop machine. This is what it sounds like on my desktop machine, and you might be able to, I don't know what you're hearing because I'm not quite sure what's recording, but you might hear more buzz. The sound might not be so good, and I'm going to switch back to my Rode USB in 1, 2, and I hope that you find, and sound is really important. Sound is really important because you want people to hear the nuances of what you're saying. If it's curiosity, if it's joy, if it's surprise, if a student said something and you're using their name and you're trying to connect with them on what they're saying. So good sound is probably the single most important thing, I think, when giving an online lecture. So I've got my physical environment, I have got my sound going okay. And so the next thing I introduce is the idea of another camera. So I use a second camera quite a bit. And I like to use a second camera because it means that I can look at various places, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But it does give a sense of dynamism between when you're cutting. So, I mean, I can notice now that, again, I have to go in and say, I mean, I'm doing this without having done, so I need to cut that without cutting me, and then I can go back into frame. So I can talk to you and still do the same things, but I love the idea of being able to cut between this camera and that camera. It gives a sense of dynamism. Now, what I'm using in order to do this is something called OBS, and if I put both cameras on, it will mean that I sometimes get lost about which camera I'm looking at, and I can see that I haven't quite got this right. There you are, you can see all of me. So, you need to do a lot of preparation. I mean, this takes a lot of practice. It's not a natural thing for me to be pressing these buttons and teaching. I would walk into a classroom and just go to the whiteboard and talk and get some energy going in the classroom. So I've tried, I've worked really hard. I've taken some time to do this, and a lot of mistakes made in trying to get to this point. And I can still see mistakes happening now. But I'm giving you a sense of how I create a sense of performance online. So in some sense, I'm ready to go. I've got my costume, I've got my background. It's kind of like a black box theatre, if you know what that is, like the Almeida in Islington in London. I've got lights, I've got microphones, I've got sound. Almost I could have music, but I don't have music. So now we go into what happens when we actually give the lecture. So it's broadcast on Zoom. We make sure that we record both the Zoom and the original OBS broadcast. I should note that I'm using an open source software called Open Broadcast Software, which is free and open source, and it's a fantastically flexible and brilliant system that you can use at home to create a mini recording studio like this. And we can talk about that another time. And so the question is, how do I create a sense of theatre now that I have my presence, now that I have my scenes set up in this system, OBS? And what I found to use is the whiteboard, because it captures my ongoing kind of moment to moment interaction with the maths that I'm speaking about. And so what happens is, on the Zoom, students either give their name or they're logged on anonymously, and I work with Matthew and other colleagues at Goldsmiths, and they're telling me what's going on, so that they will happily interrupt. They've got a great question here, because I try really hard to look at the questions and stop and read the questions, but you can't help but get carried away sometimes. So having other people there just to make sure that you are really engaging with the students and what their questions are is really important. So again, this is hard to do on my own, and I've relied hugely on Matthew and colleagues to help me with this. There are some other things to say. I put my name there because I want students to feel they can address me as Mark or Professor Dinverno. And I try really hard to make sure that if they give me their name, I thank them for their questions, and that they feel part of the story. This idea of connection is really tough online. So if they are willing to give of themselves and ask a question, really respect that. And what I haven't been doing now is, when I'm teaching, is to try to give space. The best advice I ever got about speaking is to try to make it a conversation, even if it's imagined. Okay, I'm labouring the point here, but that's what I try to do. So in performance, I'm teaching mathematics, and I'll talk about, the differential of something. And if someone says, what's the differential of 4x cubed? I will talk about it like this. Now, one thing I haven't done is I haven't really been speaking to the right camera. So let me do that now. And so I'm now speaking to the right camera. So so y equals 4x cubed. See, it's so difficult to remember all of these things, dy dx, but I don't want to take loads of takes of this. I want you to feel that this is improvised as well. Dy dx is 12x squared, and I can talk about the mechanism. So there's something about it being improvised, there's something about it being connected, there's something about it being shared, there's something about students having agency as we learn together, and there is a theatre there, where we are creating this performance in real time, and there's a humility. I mean, I have made lots of mistakes doing this, not just looking at the wrong camera, but making mistakes in my method or the calculation itself. And students don't mind that because they can see that you're trying and you've got all this technology, and they can see you're putting yourself out of your comfort zone. And there is something exciting about that. I think, if teaching is too, with the slideshow and with the bullet points, and it's like, and here is the next point I want to make, it's too safe. There is something about you bringing all of yourself into the teaching, that moment-to-moment creative process. And so, things to think about. Try and make it improvised. Try and make it feel like your creative processes are really unfolding in the moment as you're teaching. So those are just some reflections. There's lots more to say, but what I want to do now is hand over to my colleague Matthew Yee-King, who is in a studio in Goldsmith somewhere. Okay, so thank you very much for now.
Yeah, so thanks, Mark. That's a really brilliant demo. And I'd just like to say that it's really, the students responded very well to Mark's video there. And they said things like, it's great to see a master at work. We felt really privileged to be able to, have this learning experience. So definitely, all those little pieces fitted together to give a really impressive result that students really engaged with. And there were loads of questions, lots of interaction that went on in the sessions as well. I should also say, though, that often when you see someone doing quite virtuosic stuff, like you just saw with Mark, that it's easy to imagine that they can just pop out and just do that straight off the bat. But actually, I'm sure Mark would agree here that this setup was reached through a process of iteration. We worked together and had other colleagues as well, looking at the video that Mark was making, and we'd look at the lighting and we'd say, well, maybe you need a bit more light, or maybe the background's a bit too bright. And we did iterate on that. We moved the camera around to different positions. We got a slightly improved camera at one point as well. And eventually all the pieces came together into the result that Mark just demonstrated there. So really, to give people confidence, that's very much the kind of the approach you're going to need to take to get good at this, and to be a reflective practitioner and be prepared to look at your own teaching style and see what you can improve and what's wrong with it, and to learn to identify those elements. So working with other people and getting them to look at your output is a really good idea. So what I wanted to do is just show some of the similar kind of concepts, but what happens if you try and do them in a more professional studio. So where I am right now is our new one-person operable video studio, which was originally developed for the purposes of recording videos for online learning as opposed to live, but actually as you can see here, it's really excellent for doing live, and it's very much designed around the idea that someone can do a quite improvisatory, natural looking lecture and they can really control it. So before I demonstrate the sort of technical aspects of it, I just wanted to pull up my camera here and show you what we can do, or what the studio looks like rather. So let me just pull up the camera, and then you can see. So we've got these large softbox lights up there. We've got a green screen painted on the wall there. We've got special paint, and we have these two strip lights to light the green screen. And then we've got the camera and monitor over there, so I can see what I'm doing, and I can see the camera there. And then we've got the machine for capturing and the various inputs there, and my messy stuff. So that's the studio. And what I wanted to show you is what it can do. So the idea is that we can switch between different inputs. So you can see at the moment, I'm kind of, you can see I've got an iPad input feeding into it, and I can control my camera angle. So I might begin my presentation by saying, hello, welcome to Goldsmiths. We're going to be talking about how to use different camera angles to emphasize what you're saying. And then at some point, you might want to drop into the corner of the screen and then switch to another input. And then maybe say, okay, so what we're going to be talking about is this highly technical looking drawing, and you can see here I've got a really important block of grey and white blobs which have a very important meaning, right? And then you might at some point want to emphasize what you're saying, so you can jump into the middle of the screen and say, yes, I'm talking to you, and I'm trying to tell you about those in grey blocks which you just saw. And then at some point maybe you want to just get out of the way and then allow the student to just see what's on your screen and take that in. And these techniques very much came from my teaching technique as well as Mark's, which is this improvisational thing. And I do a lot of teaching of programming. And so what you can see here is a live coding environment that I might use. And so I can do my demo by going in and coding. And this is web-based, so even students can actually go and see this. So they can be given the link to this page you can see here, and they can go and look at that page and they can watch the code being edited, or they can just watch my version of it. So I guess in terms of accessibility, that gives them the ability to zoom in the code, go to high visibility mode and so on, and just set it up how they want, and they can watch the code at the same time. But that's a kind of another thing. But anyway, let's just see what this program does. So you can see it plays some music, and yeah, so the idea is really that you can do all kinds of stuff, and the main thing being that you can improvise your talk, emphasize what you're saying by changing the camera angles, change your inputs between different things, and even end up with a nice neat background at the end, and jump around on the screen as you want, and it all works very nicely. Or you can just simply, if you're recording, just capture the raw camera input to go back to the beginning again. And there's my green screen behind me, you can see, that's viewed straight through the camera there. So I don't know if Mark, I want to hand back over to Mark, see if he's got any comments about this as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Not only am I looking at the right camera, you'll notice that I've slightly shrunk the OBS window so that you don't see the corners of my black background. Wise words, as always, Matt, and thank you for your kind words at the beginning there. So we're putting this out there. Please contact us if you're interested in sharing your experiences. We're really interested. How do we make this work? My feeling, for what it's worth, is that we will move from very heavily content-rich programs to this much more idea of experiential learning, of working through something together. And so building platforms and building ways in which we can learn together and get a sense of a shared journey, I think will be the future of online learning. So thanks very much for listening, and do contact Matthew and me if you'd like to share some of your ideas. Great, thanks.